Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Secure This Seat Live here on LinkedIn. But if have been here before, then you already know we go hard on LinkedIn. Yes, you can do that on LinkedIn. We talk about all the things, careers, upward mobility for women of color. Today is International Women's Day, and so we're so happy that you're here with us. There's so many great sessions and activities happening around today, but we celebrate you each and every Monday, each and every day. So we're happy that you're here. My name is Minda Harts, and I'm your host. I'm here every Monday at noon to make sure that we talk about the things that are most important to you. Today, I'm really excited because I get a lot of messages from many of you, and you always say, okay, so I understand how we theoretically get our seat at the table, but what happens once you have it? There's so many other things that go along with that once you've secured that seat at the table. And I couldn't think of a better guest to have on today's show to talk about, because she's sat at many tables, she's created tables, and I'm so excited to introduce you to Jyothi Sarda, who's going to join us on the stage. Excited to learn more about her work. And so if you're not familiar with her work, you get to learn more about it too. Jyothi, welcome to Secure the Seat. How are you?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Excited that you're here.
And happy International Women's Day.
Yes, exactly. And so for those who may not be familiar with your work, would you tell us a little bit more about you?
Sure. Well, I mean, I have had a career in three phases. I'm a former advertising executive, and then I transitioned into entertainment and worked in marketing and entertainment. So I'm a former studio executive, I suppose. And then my latest transition has been into producing both documentary and narrative content.
We love it. And we know we're going to talk about some of those projects that you have, but we will, just to give you a little sample, we'll drop some of those links and She Could Be Next, I know, is one, and Lily is another. So we'll drop those links inside the chat so that our audience can be with you. And if you have any questions during our time, this is your time. We want to make sure that you get everything you need and ask all the questions while you have the expert here. I'm just here to facilitate the conversation, but it's all about Jyothi. But let's get started. You've had many seats, and I'm curious your thoughts in terms of the responsibility that women of color have once they have that seat at the table to other women of color.
I fully believe that women of color and women need to not only figure out how to secure their seat, but then absolutely make it easier and enable others to follow them. But one of the things I like to do is actually sort of take a step back and look at things systemically. This is not actually a new concept. If you think about the history books, are filled with explorers who found a new land and then, sort of secured the place and then made it easier for the others in their family and so forth to come on over. Our country is been built by waves and waves of immigrants like my dad, who came over first and then made it easier to build a family and for others to follow, and often would create room in their businesses for everyone else to join. So I feel like this concept is really no different. And so when I was thinking about this idea, I actually think the issue is women of color considering themselves a tribe or a community, really. I don't think it's unusual for Black women or maybe South Asian women, or, we might tribe up, if you will, more by our ethnicities. But at this moment in time, I'm feeling this real rise of a multiracial coalition, and we're all really recognizing the power of our numbers. I mean, we are going to be the fastest growing force in this country, in the near future. So why not take advantage of that and help each other rise?
Yes to all of that. I'm over here every time on Mondays. I have this really cool tambourine, Jyothi. I forget to grab it. I'm like, it's too far away. I can't run away from the screen. But you just spoke a word there, because I think if we look at ourselves like tribes, if we look at ourselves as a squad, as a team, right?
Yes.
That success is not a solo sport. It's really important that we have that mindset, because I've actually been watching a lot of shows like timepiece periods and, you know, around Jamestown and certain things like that. And you're so true, so right. Like they came over, they were putting everything in place, and we can have that same mindset, but for good, right? Not to harm, not to take things away.
Not at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that so much. And I know our listeners are loving that too. The other question that I wanted to ask you is, so oftentimes, okay, we get the seat at the table, but then we feel like we don't have any agency. We feel like we shouldn't chime in on what's going on. We're just happy to be there. So talk to us about just, you know, I often say that grateful to be here is not on the job description when you take that seat. So maybe you could talk about, how do we get out of that feeling of just being happy to be here, just being invited to sit here and not having, and feeling like we can't do anything else but sit there?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I think that part of that notion is really coming out of sort of a construct. And if you will, maybe there are those who may have wanted to design that table for us to feel that way, but we always have agency. And even when we are approaching the table, say we don't feel like we really have that seat. You talk a lot about forming squads. We just talked about it. You know, if you make it a practice, no matter what room you're in, to really identify and just try to work those relationships, and I mean authentically, not artificially, and to try your best to create that squad wherever you are going to always naturally do that. And so when you are actually in a place where you can influence, when you are in a position of power, I feel like it will come naturally. I am totally sympathetic that people are tired and that they feel like, you know, they worked really hard to try to get to a position where, you know, it may have been a long road. But just imagine there's, you know, a whole line of women of color right behind you, looking forward to, you know, having a path laid out for them. And if we all do that for each other, it will actually build up our own agency and our own strength, because the more that you are surrounded by people who, you know, are working together towards the same goal, the more you actually rise yourself. Anyway, that's my thought.
I agree. I totally agree. And that's why it's no fun to necessarily be in the room by yourself. I know sometimes we might start that way, but bringing in other people will actually give you the strength to say, okay, well, we can vibe off each other, right? So I think that the more we see what good looks like, what more rooms look like with us there, that, like you said, we all have the agency. We just have to decide how we want to use it. And so I love that. What I want to do is I want to take a few questions from the chat, because it's blowing up. And I want to make sure that, like I said, everybody, if you have questions, make sure you drop it in the chat now. One question I have here for you, Jyoti, is it's kind of long, so I'm going to paraphrase just a little bit. But what advice do you have for those who want to pivot from the table that they're at right now for creating their own table? That's a great question.
It is a great question. And I've actually pivoted a couple of times. And it's not actually, it can be easy, but it also can be difficult depending on how big of a pivot, right? So obviously, again, everything we've been talking about, and I listen to you a lot, Minda, and you're always talking about building your squad, building your relationships. But part of that is it's really utilizing a community that you created for yourself to help you make those changes. So if you're looking to pivot into a new arena, then start to build those relationships in the area, or even seek advice from those that you trust to try to guide you towards what direction you think you ought to be in. Over time, every time I've wanted to make a change, I started out almost unconsciously following this path of having a lot of conversations and really listening, you know, not looking for that introduction or that sort of job opening, but really listening to what those folks, those wise ones, if you will, that I was seeking out, thought I might want to consider, and what soft skill, what I needed to do to prepare for that pivot. And then, and any of us can do this, and it's the same process one uses to actually get that seat at the table, right? It's always about relationships in many ways, and not artificial ones, authentic ones. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Great advice. And I think that, a lot of people right now, they feel like, oh, we're at home, we're, social distancing, that it's hard to build that social capital, but you can still build it in a virtual environment. Wouldn't you agree, Joe?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. We have another question here. I love this question too. What advice would you give your younger self on owning your power as a woman of color in the workplace?
Oh, well, I wish I could talk to my younger self. I've had this conversation with a lot of, sort of younger women coming up in whatever field that they're coming up in. And part of that is like we were just talking about, you feel like you're the only person in the room. You're just happy to be there. You don't want to rock the boat, but truly there is a way to, no matter where you are, to really not only, understand who are the influencers in that room, making sure that you're doing them a service by letting them know your worth. It isn't bragging to inform your boss, to inform others who are in a circle of influence of the projects that you're working on, of the accomplishments that you have, or maybe of some of the other skills that are not readily apparent, that are kind of interesting, that workplace might want to bring forward. People are busy. And if you just continuously find a way to make sure that what you're up to is being known. And I wish I did that more. I just kept my head down and worked hard, right? And I thought somebody would surely notice, but that's not the way it works. And if you really think about it more as a service to others, to let them know, then I think it will feel a little less like bragging and a little bit more just like being informational.
I love that advice so much. It's so important. I often think about this too. I'm like, man, what would I tell younger Minda? So much. So much.
I did. I just stayed in my office and just, can't you see all the work I'm doing?
Exactly. And I also sometimes, I don't know if you do this, but I'm like telling myself now what the future me will benefit from you doing now and speaking in these ways.
And I just want to say, I'm still pretty bad at, like, even say I have partners, and we're working remotely, I just sort of do the work that I'm doing. I don't want to bother anybody. And then at the end, you have to be in communication. You have to let people know, and it is not annoying. It's really just, keeping people in the loop about what are the accomplishments and what are the attributes that you have.
Absolutely.
It works no matter where you are in the stage of your career.
I agree. You hear that, everybody? Get out of your own way. That's exactly.
Get out of your own way. Exactly. Well put.
Yes. I want to hop back into the question that I have for you around She Could Be Next. Can you talk to us about this impactful and inspiring documentary, and talk to us about the importance of highlighting, intersectionality, race, and gender?
Yeah, it was really interesting when my partners and I started working on this documentary. We decided we were going to focus on women of color. And we ended up focusing on these six amazing women of color running for office in the 2018 election cycle, and then also the organizers who supported their campaigns. And our idea was not so much we were trying to look at the system, right, in this country. And one of the things that we did when we would go and start to pitch the project, we would be asked frequently, why women of color? And, the three of us were all women of color, and it just made perfect sense that any astute analysis of the political system, it really seemed like it needed to be looked at through the lens of race and gender. And I feel at this moment now, with all the turmoil that we've gone through, it feels a little bit more self-evident why that is, because if you think of any issue in this country, any challenge, it is felt more acutely when you're a woman of color, because you are dealing with those sort of double biases. And it's not like every single person deals with it, but as a system, as a whole, absolutely. So that if you're solving, and as one of the organizers in our documentary said, if you're solving for the problems of women of color, then actually you are solving for all problems. So, and we know that this is going to be one of the fastest growing demographics and voter demographics in the near future. So this is a force we have to contend with.
I am so happy that you and your partners were able to get this out in the world. And like you said, now I feel like we don't have to, even when I put my book out into the world, the memo, it was like trying to convince people that women of color have this experience, a different experience. And it's like, I shouldn't have to convince you. This is a lived experience. We know. Where can people, we're going to drop the links in the chat, but where can people watch this documentary?
Well, actually, for the month of March, they can watch it on Amazon Prime. So that's an excellent place. If they want any information about it, they can just go to andshecouldbenext.com, and we have all the viewing information. And then there will be a ton of watch parties that we are hosting this month, because now that we've all had a pause after, sort of a very hard-fought election cycle, I think many are looking forward to sort of taking a breather and really just sort of reflecting. The ideas, I just wanted to add, Minda, the ideas that I thought were captured in And She Could Be Next were really the ideas of harnessing the power of community and relationships to affect the change that, in this case, a political change that these women wanted to see in the world. And if you think about that for the workplace, everything we've talked about, building your squad, building those relationships, pulling up others to have a seat at the table, it's all about organizing for whatever changes you want to see in the workplace. So the theory of change or the way you go about it is not that dissimilar. And I thought, for me, that was an insight. I don't know if that would be for your viewers, but I wanted to share that.
That was perfect. The chat is going wild. Listen, everybody watching, let's support. Make sure that if you don't have Amazon Prime, figure out how to get Amazon Prime and watch it. It's such a great documentary. And just like you said, Jyoti, there's so many applicable tools in the documentary that we can take inside the workplace that we could leverage to make sure that we could be next, right? So
exactly.
You be next.
We should be next.
You should be next. It's time for you to be next. I love that so much. I want to jump into our bonus questions. That's such a great conversation. I hate that. I always get sad when I get happy and sad when I head into the bonus questions, because I know we're nearing the end of the episode. But as you may know, I am a lover of grits and rap lyrics. Jyoti, do you eat grits?
I have, but it's not like something I eat all the time. But I do have. I want you to try something. It may seem a little odd. Try a dollop of lime pickle and swirl it around with a bit of salt. It's, it's spicy.
I'm gonna try it.
A little sweet, a little sour, a little spicy.
I'm gonna try it, and I hope our audience will try it with me too. I love rap lyrics. I'm just curious, what is your favorite rap lyric and why?
So, it's funny. I actually am a fan of Eminem. I won't say I'm a huge rap fan, but there's a couple of artists that I really enjoy. But I was thinking that what would be more appropriate for our discussion is Janelle Monáe and Erykah Badu have this song Queen, and the end is just, the whole thing is a phenomenal rap, and the sequel. And it just felt like those are words to live by.
Absolutely. Anytime I know that they might not consider themselves rap artists, but Janelle Monáe, Erykah Badu, they definitely drop bars. So
yeah.
So I love that. And I hope that everybody will listen to that and just let that absorb in you. Also, we have so many of our, every week we have a great audience, and sometimes people don't see themselves as a leader because they don't have a title, but I'm a firm believer that we all have the capacity to lead without a title. And so just curious, what advice would you give our audience today on how to make the workplace better than they found it?
Yeah, I think for leaders and for participants, diversity is actually a strength. it's bringing in all the different viewpoints to really solve that problem. I once interviewed a congresswoman who had worked in the Defense Department, and she said the lack of diversity was actually a national security issue, because if you only apply one way of thinking to a problem, you're going to be leaving a lot on the table. So for those future leaders and for current leaders, don't look at this as, sort of a burden, something that you have to sort of drag along or that you have to be made to do. Think of it as sort of a strategic advantage, and really, pursue it from that standpoint, because I really do believe that. I think the more you can bring to the table, the better problem solving you're going to have. So maybe that's just a different perspective on that.
Oh, I love that so much. And when you said that, not having it is a national security, I'm thinking exactly,
How can you understand where other people or other countries are coming from if you don't have all of the people who kind of understand that way of thinking at the table? It's the same thing applies, we're in a fast changing world. So the more people you can have from different points of view kind of tackling that problem, the faster you're going to come up with that solution.
Absolutely. And in the workplace, it's like, you're not going to be if you're playing a long game, if you're playing a sustainable game, if you're playing an equitable game, then you have to have it. It all works. It's win-win.
Absolutely.
I love that so much. We have just enough time for me to take one more question. This has been so great. We'll drop all of the links in the chat so that you all have that. And I know that today, this week, have a date night, whatever you got to do, watch the documentary. One last question, Jyoti, is around being a woman of color. Somebody in the chat is saying that they're finding it extremely hard to not tap out right now because they just feel that exhaustion. Do you have any advice on how to, stay focused and reframe some of this fatigue that many of us have probably experienced in the last year? Great question.
Yeah, I mean, look, no matter who you are, you're feeling fatigue. It's been not just a trying year, but it's been a trying set of years, right? And that's where I think both you and I are talking about, how do you bring in that community? That community isn't just there to sort of push forward. It can also be there when you need to lean back. When you are working and just in relationship with people who share your values and who kind of are up to the same thing in the world, then when you need to, you can lean back and you can let another sister kind of step forward, and you just keep that rhythm up. And so I think that's super important, because a lot of people who are, really, up to big things in the world feel like they need to be the ones always pushing forward. And it's really important sometimes to just actually pull back and reflect and regroup and let someone else, carry the load for a bit and then come back and pick up that load. And it isn't always even a load, Sometimes we can affect change just by sort of being and sort of being in balance, if you will, rather than always pushing forward. So that's what I would say is take that time, understand. I think we all agreed that it's been a really trying, even if you're not out of work, even if you've got the resources you need to kind of make it through this pandemic, it's just been really tough on sort of the social fabric, right? So that's what I would say is take care of yourself.
Yes, I love that advice so much. And you're so right, because even there's so many things happening online with women of color, with Black women, and a lot of people, even for me, they're like, Minda, why haven't you talked about this? And I'm like, there's a lot of people that are able to talk about it. I can't talk about every inequality that happens, although I stand in.
Actually, that's a great point. And others, there are things that other people will be taking care of. Mm-hmm. Just know that, and that you figure out what your lane is and what you feel good about talking about, or you feel good about sort of working towards, and you don't have to solve every problem in the world.
Yes, that part. I love that so much. Jyoti, this has been a great, great conversation. I'm so excited. Is there any final words you want to give to?
Oh, well, Minda, I'm a huge fan of yours. I just think it's just the memo was a much needed book. I just think it's amazing the way you not only offer sort of like top level advice, but also really practical advice. And you're building this amazing community. So that's actually my final word here is thank you, Minda, for the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. And I just thank you for telling our stories, thinking about us and placing us in these different ways, because people need to be exposed, and they sometimes are able to be educated through various mediums, right? So I'm so happy that you're building the tables and sitting at the tables that you're at. Where's the best place for people to follow you?
Well, actually, I do have my own website, which is nimblemediallc.com. And I have a number of projects that I'm working on, but I'm, of course, really proud of And She Could Be Next. And so I was really happy we got a chance to talk about that.
I love that. Well, but you mentioned, I know that you have a project. Is it Lily? Do you want to mention that at all?
I do, actually. So my new project, I'm supporting the work of Rachel Feldman, who wrote this beautiful script about Fair Pay icon Lilly Ledbetter. And it just feels like a great time to really reintroduce Lilly to, the first act of legislation that President Obama signed was actually the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. And then afterwards, there's been a lot of sort of clawing back of the provisions there. It just feels as we exit this pandemic where women and women of color particularly have really borne the burden of, there's so many who have been forced to leave the workplace or just really struggling, that I feel it's important to have a story like Lily's that reflects on, the importance of putting women's issues at the center of the economic recovery. And I just believe in, storytelling that really can illustrate those points. And so I'm excited to be working on this project.
Ooh, it sounds so good. I won't bore you with it, but about a couple months ago, I went down this Lilly Ledbetter rabbit hole, and I was just reading everything. I had known about her in the legislation, but I just wanted to find out more about her because, like you said, equal pay is so important, even more so than ever before. And
the thing people don't realize is she grew up poor in Alabama, and really, illustrates many of the issues that women face in the workplace when they're being harassed. They don't really have a choice because this is the best job that they can get at that moment in time. And sometimes they just need to hang in there. And that's why I really believe having that squad, having that sort of organizing group around you to help push through when you are facing those adversities really makes a difference, because she didn't have that. She was the only one at that time.
I'm so glad you're telling that story. So awesome. Listen, everybody, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Secure the Seat Live. I know you did, because I see the chat blowing up. Make sure that you support all of Jyoti's work. I also want to shout out She Will Rise. That's actually the shirt that I'm wearing today, because it's an organization that is promoting that our next Supreme Court justice be a Black woman. We have yet to have.
Yes.
Very, very important. But we just want to make sure that you take care of yourself. Make sure you share this episode and share the documentary with others, so that we can just signal to the powers that be that this type of content, these type of stories are very important, and that we want more of them. So, all right. See you all later. Thank you, Jyoti.
Thank you. Bye.